today. Welcome. In today's talk, I'll be discussing what it means to be good Internet citizens. Ease of use was once the mantra of the FileMaker community. However, the new buzz is accessibility. Your FileMaker database is in the unique position of being the hub for all your information. Taking advantage of the ease of use of FileMaker and the different connectivity options that are available, this tool can become even more important. In the first FMAcademy talk, we learned about how to create effective dashboards to summarize data. This can be done with FileMaker data, and it can also be done with external data. But there's more to external data sources than just creating dashboards. In this talk, I will review how to extend your FileMaker database to the web using external data in your database and extending FileMaker data to a website, thus solidifying your place as a data control point. But first, a word from our sponsors. FMAcademy is a consortium of leading FileMaker development companies in the United States. All of the FMAcademy members are platinum-level members of the FileMaker Business Alliance. And our purpose is to further educate FileMaker users and developers like you to encourage best practices and to foster further adoption of the software. We cover the Eastern Seaboard from New York, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Atlanta, and working westward from St. Louis to Dallas and Portland. Now on to the talk. We live in a world that is not dominated by FileMaker. But no matter what platform you are using, everybody is worried about their data. Where it is, who can see it, and who can change it, and also who can take it. As I was getting ready for this seminar, I found this in my mailbox. This is a copy of eWeek. Actually, this was the last paper copy. They're now going all digital. Even the mainstream pundits are pointing to data flow in the near term as being an important issue. You can see next year it's all about the control of data. How data enters the system, where it resides, how it's processed, who can access and manage it, and who can store and archive it. That's where the power in IT will be for the next year. Hopefully longer than that. Well, why should we care about sharing data? The most important reason is content management is public. That is, the web is public. Your data is private. The interface, and this is the interface between the public and private. You should be aware there are different types of information. Understand what part of your data is public. For example, product names, if you have a commercial database. And what part of your data is private? For instance, the quantities of each item that are on order. That's private information. You need to be able to demarcate the boundaries between your public data and your private data. Discretion is the better part of valor. As in life, you should always try to avoid dangerous or unpleasant situations. Only share information that benefits you. If you had a medical database, for example, you would think twice before moving it to a web platform without first making sure the entire thing is secure. And the third rule of thumb I'd like to point out is let each system do what it does best. FileMaker is great at client-server apps. It's great for reporting. It's even great for web-based client portals. Modern CMS systems, content management systems, are better for public, interactive, high-volume websites. So being good Internet citizens means respecting the other databases. And you'll see that in today's talk, I use the native tools whenever they're available. But if not, I can always fall back on FileMaker's toolset. I spend a lot of time translating information for users and for clients. For most end users, integration typically means I can get my data, FileMaker data here, I can get my data from anywhere, from the desktop, from a browser, or from my iPad. But for us, the development community, integration Integration really means I can access and publish my data from many sources. Luckily, from FileMaker, you have many options to do this. You can access data from ESS sources using import and export, OBDC sources using ESS. Using the web publishing engine, you can use PHP, or you can build web services to use or consume your data. There are some other methods to exchange data. Those would be plugins. You can use plugins to integrate with QuickBooks in a similar fashion. That uses XML as a go-between between the two programs. It's also possible to integrate with Outlook, Exchange, and the Google ecosystem. Depending on the task at hand and on your needs, you may need to use one or more of these techniques to share your data. What exactly is content management? In this context, it is simplest to say it's a website designed to post blogs, stories, or pieces of news and allow comments by other users. Well, what is a blog? This is the heart of the CMS. A blog is like a record. In Drupal or WordPress, a blog has the following elements: title, body, and category. A content management system is also built to be easily managed by non-technical users. So it's a platform for delivering blogs. It's built typically using PHP and MySQL. Your first clue was when I mentioned records and field names. A CMS is a database. Most blogs use MySQL or some other type of SQL database in the back end. And being a database, of course, you should realize that a blog is conceptually a record in a table somewhere. And the elements that I mentioned, title, the body, and the category, are fields in that table. This isn't exactly true, and we'll talk about that later, but this is a great way to think about it. The language that's used to interact with that back-end with that back-end database is PHP. The strength of the CMSs that I'll be talking about is they already have a robust user interface that lets them be managed by non-technical users. They can also be managed at the PHP level by someone who understands and is willing to modify the PHP. They excel at setup and speed. They suffer from the same drawbacks as most websites. That is not modification by non-technical users. Customization is also a double-edged sword. CMSs rely heavily on plugins for customization. As long as there's a plugin available and it does what you want, then the system is customizable. There is a lot of plugins available, not an infinite number. Your particular customization may not be available. You can do lots of things with plugins, so much that a content management site wouldn't even look like a blog anymore. Some examples of plugins would be, well, the canonical example, the one that most people think of, is UberCart. This is a plugin that creates all the tables needed to create an e-store: products, inventory, invoices, line items, things like that. There are literally thousands of plugins. Some improve the posting experience, adding things like CAPTCHA. Some add images and image galleries to your website, and some add calendars. Why are CMSs important, and why is this topic valuable? Well, first off, I'd like to point out 30% of all the websites in the world are built using CMSs. That's a lot of websites. Content management is everywhere. You might not even realize it. Here are 4 common types of content management systems: Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, and SharePoint. And I'll show you an example of each one. Drupal is what's used to run whitehouse.gov. It's actually hard to believe this is run using a content management site. It's hard to find the blog on there, and there's a lot of modification. But Drupal is used to run whitehouse.gov. WordPress is used, actually 15% of all the the content management systems in the world use Drupal. And here's an example of a Drupal website. This one is our own FileMaker.org. This one is a little bit more traditional. You can see this is a blog, and underneath it is a second blog. Here's the title. This is the content. And each blog entry is put in a separate category, and you can search the categories up here and display those. A third type of content management system is Joomla. This is used all over the web also. Here's a website that's run using Joomla. Now, on the Guggenheim site, you can see that there are a couple of different types of blogs. I'm not sure if you can actually see, but there's what's on exhibit right now in this column, and then there's another category of blogs, which is shown in this column, which are news events. These are also blog entries. And then there's some other navigations which show you more blog entries. But this basically is a content management system. Finally, I'd like to point out SharePoint can be used and is used by many companies as content management system in a public-facing website. Unlike the other three, SharePoint is not open sourced and it is not free. The public-facing plugin for for SharePoint costs about $40,000. But it is there and people do use it as content management in a public-facing fashion. I'm aware that SharePoint is used in a lot of places for private content management. Today, I'd like to highlight two types of integration that I've done here at ITSolutions over the past year. The first is taking information from a FileMaker database and pushing it up to a website. Some examples of this would be showing users a list of products that you have for sale in your database. That could be fed from your FileMaker database, but viewable on a website. Another example of this would be if someone logs into your content management site, you can show them some private information, such as their shipping information, if they want to double check on their shipping address. After that, the second example I'm going to look at will be pulling information down from a website and bringing it inside a FileMaker database. An example of that would be orders placed on a website being pulled into your back-end database. And another example could be users who go to your website, type in a question, ask a question, that could be pulled directly into your FileMaker database for users to see and respond from there. Well, let's get on to the first example. This is pushing data up to a website. The problem that we're trying to solve here is a school that has a robust back-end database built in FileMaker. They also have a website that's built using WordPress, one of the content management systems I mentioned a moment ago. The back-end database is used to track registrations for each class each semester. And the website is used to present the classes offered to the public. You can probably see the problem already. They essentially have two separate databases. Both the back-end database and the website have course information. There's two tables that have to remain in sync with each other, one in FileMaker and one in WordPress. The users wanted a way to integrate these two. Now, in their incarnation of the website, each course is a blog entry with a structured title. The categories define the sections of the course. So if I was taking a course in sports, the category would be sports. If I'm taking a math class, it would be an academic category. And since we're using the built-in structure of WordPress, it made the most sense to use the application program interface, or the API, that was provided. In this case, I'm using a remote procedure call to create the blog entry. The benefit of this is I don't need to know anything about the underlying data structure. WordPress will handle all of that. I just feed it the necessary information, and the remote procedure call, the RPC, creates the record in the website. What is an RPC, you ask? An RPC is something that was developed about 20 years ago by Dave Weiner at Userland Software. It eventually morphed into something called SOAP, Simple Object Access Protocol, and this is the basis for web services. RPCs are simpler than SOAP calls and also a little simpler than web services. PHP supports them, as does most other languages. I like to think of RPCs and all these other things I mentioned, SOAP and web services. They're like scripts that can be called externally that will do something on your database, in this case on your website. Well, here's a screenshot from the school's database. At the top, we can see information about the course. Here's the name of the course. Here's the course number. And you can see the price that we're offering the course for. And at the bottom, there's a calculation field that shows the description of the class. Each class has a name and a unique code right here. All of these things are grouped together to make the title of the blog. You can see that right here. Mahjong for the beginner / $239 and $55. Now, the solution we came up with is a button that, when clicked, takes this information and sends it up to the website, just like this. The button is actually in the menu, so you don't get to see it. But when the user selects the menu selection, it takes that entire record and pushes it up to a website. So on the website, we can see here's our title. Here's that calculated field, which is the description of the course. And here's the course category. It's in the games, because Mahjong is a game. The reason we did this is so we didn't need to create any new fields in our website. This is a feature that's provided by a plugin. And the particular designer that I happened to be working with wasn't interested in adding fields to the website. So this was the compromise that we came up with, embedding all of that extra information into the title. So let's look at how we do this. The tools that we're going to need, we need three tools. We need a script in order to set information and to send the information up to the website. We need the remote procedure call, the RPC, and that's a PHP code. Since it's PHP, we need a way to send that up to the website, and we do that with SmartPill. At this point, I'd like to point out that this work was based on some work previously done by Laura Coleman, whose name is right down here. If your needs are anything more sophisticated than posting to WordPress, you should check out her very powerful plugin called WordPress FileMaker Sync. You can get it at that website right there. It's a very nice product. And also, if you want more information about SmartPill, here's their address right here. So these are the three things that we need in order to push the record up to the website. Let's look first at the remote procedure call. Here's the guts of the RPC. This is a snippet of PHP code, basically 3 lines of code. The first line defines the function. Here's the name of our function. And the next couple of lines between the curly brackets defines what the function does. It basically builds a little bit of XML. Here we can see our pieces of XML and puts them all together. And then the next line of code does the actual posting. It runs our remote procedure call and calls that function. And then we grab the result. Since the remote procedure calls generally send and receive XML information, many times they're called XML RPCs. You can see that right here, XML RPC. In our case, the RPC is a function that creates a post. we feed it those fields. Oh, let me go back. We feed it the required fields. Here's the name, and the body is up in this part here. And the function performs the steps which ultimately create the blog post. Here's the script that we're calling in the FileMaker database. We first start off, I'll go through this line by line. First, we start off with some error trapping. We make sure, am I allowed to run this script? That's what this if clause does. Then we set some variables. We set up the location of our website. We set up some passwords. We create the body. And then this step, the result step right here, is the one that actually performs the RPC. I'll show, here's a detail of that step. And you'll see here, what we do is we call the smart pill function, which says, do a piece of PHP code. This is our PHP, which is what we saw on the previous slide, a couple slides ago. And then here's the echo, where we grab the result. After that PHP step, we do some cleanup, where we mark the original record as being uploaded, and we mark the time that it was uploaded. So this is the part that actually does the uploading. When this script is run, it creates the fields in the record, assembles them in a meaningful way, then it creates a new post in the WordPress website, and returns the result back to FileMaker. Well, I want to take a little step back and answer a question. Why are we using an API in the first place? Well, in content management systems specifically, and in many databases in general, the data is abstracted. This means that the structure of the database is not hard-coded. For example, if we were to build a blog using FileMaker, we would probably have a table, call it blog, and in it we would have some fields, title, body, author, etc. But what happens if we want to add a field to the database? We would have to go into Manage Databases and add a field. In a simple abstracted database, we would have a table called Data with 3 fields, record, content, and title. The record is the field name and of the parent field where all the data is related. The content field would be the field value, and the title field is the field name. Using this type of structure, the end user could create an infinite number of fields simply by defining new values. I'll show you how you do this in FileMaker. This is probably an example that you've already seen and used, and you didn't realize or didn't call it abstraction. Here's an example of a people database built in FileMaker. On the left is we have 5 hard-coded fields. One for phone 1, phone 2, email, the person's IM, and a website. This is fine. What happens when we want to add another type of phone number? Maybe I want to start capturing people's Skype names, or I have someone that has 2 home phones. I would have to go into Manage Database and add a new field. On the right is an example of how we would abstract this. In the abstracted model, we have a separate table for contacts, and there are 2 separate data entry fields. One for the type of contact, second for its value. And you can see here, type is a value list. And in the value list, we have work phone, home phone, email, a couple of types of emails, and other options like that. You select the type of contact, and then you put its value in. So if I would come along and come up with another way, maybe I want my Twitter handle on here, all I would need to do is add to the value list a new type of contact, and then I could enter the data. I wouldn't have to actually go into Manage Database. So this is an example of hard-coded versus abstracted data structure. Now let's go back to the topic, posting a FileMaker record up to a WordPress site. In review, what we've done is we've taken data from inside FileMaker and we've pushed it up to WordPress. And to do that, we've used the existing API. The nice thing about using an API is we don't need to learn any of the details about the system. I'm using a tool that someone else has already error-trapped and figured out how to use. I'm less likely, as the developer, I'm less likely to break something in the website. We can also automate this process. For example, in the school database that we were just in, when certain key fields change, the database could automatically upload those changes. My users of this system no longer have to enter courses in the FileMaker database, then re-enter the same data in their WordPress site. Now, all they do is they find the courses for the current semester, click a single button, and all those courses are uploaded to the website in batch. This is a real time saver for them, and they were very happy with the results. Now, I'd like to tell you about the second example about integration. This one is actually, coincidentally, it's a school. In this example, we're pulling down information from a website, and we're pushing it into our local FileMaker database. This school, in addition to uploading classes onto their website, they have an online registration system. This is a Drupal-based website. On their Drupal website, they have an e-commerce plugin, the one we talked about earlier, called UberCart. It's one of the more popular plugins for e-commerce. It lets you store products, users, create invoices. It also interfaces with PayPal, and it does some inventory control. This particular school wasn't taking advantage of all of these functions, but they were there in case they wanted in case they did need them. Before I came on the scene, this is what they were doing. They were letting their users register for classes on the website. The users would pay for the class using PayPal. Then, in the back office, they would get an email from PayPal the following day. Sometimes it was more than the following day. The email would then be printed out and distributed among the office staff. This would often take more than a day. The office staff would then literally have to retype the data that was on the piece of paper that was emailed back from PayPal, retype it back into their database. This took a long time. It was error-prone. So my job was to automate this task as much as possible. This is an image from their website. There's a couple of interesting wrinkles which made this an interesting project. At the beginning of the talk, I talked about demarcating public and private data. Here's another issue with public and private. When I pull data into the database from a public source, I have to make sure the data is right. I can't depend on the web user to enter the data properly. This company, for example, likes an address to have all the street names spelled out. If you live on Main Street, they don't like to use ST period. They want you to write out the whole word. Well, you can't depend on someone on the website to actually do that for you. So anyway, let's talk about this image. Up at the top, here's the title of a class, and here's the description. Here's the description of the class right here. What a user would do is they would log into the website using this area right here. This is a plugin. Then they would add the course to their cart. They would purchase the cart. Once the purchase was made, they are taken to a PayPal website and they pay for it. Course is purchased and the person, okay. Now, once the course has been adjudicated, once the transaction or the purchasing has been adjudicated by PayPal, then the record appears in FileMaker using ESS. And this is what that same record looks like in the database. Up at the top, you can see the parts that were filled out on the website. This is the information about the person purchasing the class, each class or registration that was purchased is listed down here. Now, each class, the person making the overall payment might not be the person taking each class. So, for example, I can register for a class, and on the same invoice, also register my wife or my daughter for other classes. So each class that comes down in this orange part right here is has to be pulled into the database. This is the key job of the office staff. When we're importing data into our database, there's really no substitute for a person looking at the data. I've created a number of tools to make this as easy as possible for the office staff. Plus, since the office staff is just editing the data, we have all the FileMaker tools at our disposal, and the job is much easier and much faster now. These, as I said, these are the items on the web invoice. Each one corresponds to a student registering for the class. So the first thing the office user has to do is to match the person taking a class with the appropriate person in the database, or to check whether or not the student is already in the database. And to do that, I built a tool which is right here. When the user clicks on this tool, they get a pop-up window, which is shown right here. This shows all the people in the database with a similar name to the person who registered for the class. For example, I might have registered for a class for my daughter, whose name is Abby. She might not be in the database as Abby. She could be in their FileMaker system as Abigail. This tool lets the office worker do a fuzzy kind of search like that and find the appropriate person. Once they've identified the actual student taking the class, they can assign that person to this registration using one of these buttons here. If they do a search on the database and they determine that this is, in fact, a brand new student who's not in our database yet, they can use this side of the tool right here to bring up the information from the website, and then, they click on that button right there. It would bring the information up. They can do a final edit, and then use this button right here to add the contact to the database. Eventually, the user assigns the student to the registration. Here, the user gets, over here on the right-hand side, the office worker gets another opportunity to update any information in the database about this person. Maybe they need to update the birthday, or maybe they've gotten a new or updated phone number, which they can do. Once the information is all accurate and up to date, the office worker needs to click on this button right here in the middle. The registration is now finally copied into the actual database. An invoice is created, and it's marked paid, and the student is assigned to the appropriate class. And this registration, this web registration, is marked up here as complete. This button right here works by grabbing all of the data into variables and then essentially calling the same buttons in the regular user interface of the main database that the office staff uses. And then it just feeds those scripts with these variables. Now, let's talk a little bit about this how this happens in the background. All of these fields right here are coming directly from the website. The FileMaker user cannot edit these fields. They are just for display purposes. All of these fields are coming from the tables in the Drupal website, and we're viewing them all using ESS. Right here, I've labeled all the Drupal tables in blue. This is the order table, and it's related to the line items table. That's the line items are the things that are actually purchased, the registration. Each line item is related to a product table right here. And then there's a join table that relates each one of those products to some other extra information having to do with the person that is the student registering for the course, their address, their email, their name, and their age. All that stuff is in these lookup tables far to the right. UberCart does not have an appropriate API for me to use. So I had to do this old school, and I mapped all of these tables using ESS. The good news here is the information is not terribly abstracted. There is an orders table. There is a product table. Some of the information was. The bad news was I had to reverse engineer all of the relationships making up the UberCart ecosystem. If I had an RPC or maybe a web service to call, I wouldn't have had to have done this. The web service probably would have worked something like I feed it the ID number of the order, and then I would get back some XML code that I could parse out that has all this information. But I had to figure out all these relationships myself. Luckily, with the help of the webmaster, I was able to figure it all out, and he was very helpful. Now, right here, I have a FileMaker table, which is a shadow table. One of the important rules to keep in mind is when you're looking at an ESS table on a website, you should only look. You can't write your own fields in the background. So I needed to make a one-to-one table for the web orders. This is a FileMaker table, and there's one record in each FileMaker in the FileMaker table for every web order in the UberCart table. And in this table is where I hold things like the date that it was pulled in, who's the person that pulled this record into FileMaker, and the actual record ID of the person taking the class. This is part of what I talked about in the beginning with respecting other people's database. You shouldn't put these new fields in an open source platform because eventually the UberCart will be updated and all of my fields that I created will be overwritten. That's why you should create a shadow table for anything that you're going to add to that ecosystem and keep it within your FileMaker database. So to review, we were able to pull down information from a website into FileMaker. In order to do this, I used ESS because I needed to use the native FileMaker tools because there were no native APIs available to me. There's really no substitute for having an expert user scrub your data. Make sure it's appropriate. Make sure it's a real order or a real record of some sort. And then finally, rolling your own in this way, it requires a little bit more knowledge of the structure of the back-end database, and also probably requires you to be a little bit more savvy and reverse engineering the structure of some of these plugins, which is not always obvious. So, in summary for today's talk, today I introduced you to content management systems. I showed you two different scenarios to integrate a content management system with a back-end database. In one, we pushed up course descriptions using an existing API. In the other example, we downloaded orders using ESS. I hope you understand a little bit about the thinking process that you need to go through in order to decide how to integrate your particular solution with your website. And I'd also like to thank everyone here for taking the time out of your day to listen to me today. I hope you learned a little bit from today's talk, and I'll take any questions if you have any. We're going to open up the floor to Mark.
There. Thank you very much, Jerry. I'm going to read some of the questions that came in. The first question we have, can the website, I guess the website we're integrating with, be be hosted elsewhere, I guess not where your FileMaker server is?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Your website can be hosted anywhere. It only depends on the setup. In both scenarios, the website can be remote. In pushing a data from your FileMaker database up to a website, there was a line in the RPC that defines where your database is, and that is done simply with a URL. It has a URL saying, here's where the database is. Pulling the information down using ESS, also, that was done with the remote website. That involved talking to the database administrator of the website. He created the appropriate holes in their firewall and gave me the OBDC driver in order the DSN in order to pull the data down. But yeah, they can be, the websites can be anywhere.
Very good. Are you aware of an API for Joomla? So Joomla, another content management system.
Right. I know Joomla. No, I didn't see one. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. The APIs are sometimes hard to come by.
Right.
I'm not aware of one.
Okay. Just with a quick search, there is something out there that supports the same method you used for WordPress, which was XML over RPC.
There is?
So,
okay.
Yeah, api.joomla.org.
There you go.
We'll get everyone what they're looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Google.
And then we've got, do we recommend a methodology for reverse engineering table relationships in foreign databases?
Oh, that was fun. The way that I did it was, first I did a web search to see if someone has done it before me. Always look, always ask first. And I actually couldn't find anything that was decipherable by me. I did look at the, in this particular case, I looked at the UberCart developer documentation, and to be honest, it was a little over my head, not my happy spot. But I did a lot of hunting and pecking. Usually the table names are at least named, they're prefixed with the name of the plugin, so you can tell what belongs to the plugin. And then I just whittled it down from there, looking in the tables a lot. And like I say, the web host for this particular project, he became my best friend for about a week. He was able to figure out a lot of it.
Okay. Do you have reservations about creating new records in remote databases using ESS, not creating new fields? I'd say that's a good question. Yeah, usually it is almost always preferred to use the API or published method by the person providing the software over writing records behind the scenes to a database. That is pretty much going to be your last option almost always. I can't think of a reason to want to do that, only because in most systems the business rules would not be applied. Maybe there are some business rules in field validation, but very few that, so all the dependencies wouldn't be in place. It would be a bad idea to create records in another system via ESS. It should be avoided if possible.
Yeah, the whole power of these content management systems is their wonderful user interface that has all of these rules already built into it. They've already done a lot of that work. You're really circumventing a lot of hard work to get everything to integrate properly if you go behind the scenes and create records. And then you also have to understand at the beginning how everything is related, because chances are the new record that you make someplace will mess something up somewhere else.
Okay. I always thought that the best external API is the one you are not using, is how this question starts. Is the CMS's API stable? Are there bugs or unwanted changes? Finally, is there another way to go than an API to push data? So,
the RPCs do change. Typically, they retain their backward compatibility. For instance, this RPC that I used was pretty old. I guess you should always check to see if there's what the current one is. Yeah. but I would always recommend looking for some kind of API to integrate with.
And there are quite a few plugins for FileMaker that will let you do, post, send, gets on the URL, or ways to communicate with web services. So SmartFilt's just one of them,
Right. Yeah.
And then we have a question. Why do you need a shadow table for the extra data? Pull date, user, etc. Why can't you save the data in extra fields in the existing FileMaker table?
Oh yeah, I guess I could have done that. Oh, you know why? Because each order record coming down from UberCart, I need to be able to market that particular record with a status before it's even pulled into FileMaker. Remember, the order record in UberCart is in UberCart, and the office staff look at it, and then they decide whether or not it's pulled into FileMaker, and you create a FileMaker record there. So, for instance, there's two fields that I forgot to mention: a status field for the order inside FileMaker and a notes field. If the office worker looks at a record, before they bring it in, they're just looking at it, and they see, oh, the price this person paid was wrong. They're a member, and they paid the non-member price. They flag that as being a problem record, and they write a little note in there, and then they leave it there. They do not pull it in. So this lets you do that.
Okay. And then a question, can you use FileMaker, I guess, custom web publishing alongside a content management system, I guess on the same server, or can they work together?
Absolutely. They're not mutually exclusive. You can use custom web publishing also. Actually, I have a client that used custom web publishing to push information from their database into a Drupal website, not using, they built their own plugin. I mentioned plugins for Drupal, how they have plugins to add images and things like that. They actually bit the bullet and wrote a Drupal plugin that would pull information. They actually had records they pulled in, and then something in Drupal created a PDF on the fly. It was pretty sophisticated. So you can do that, but it's not for the faint of heart.
Okay, that is all we have for questions. Jerry, I'll ask you to just flip that slide, and we can show everyone how to get in contact with the members of FileMaker Academy if they have further questions or want to discuss how an integration with FileMaker and a content management system could work for them. Thank you very much. So if you can kind of match your area where you're coming from with the territory that a FileMaker Academy member services and supports, you'll be able to have any questions you have about this presentation or other FileMaker-related questions answered. If the place is not mentioned on this list, please contact Jim Higgins at ITSolutions-Inc.com, and he'll be able to redirect you to the appropriate FMAcademy member that will help you. Thank you guys very much for attending, and obviously, by all means, follow up with us with any questions you have. Follow up with Jim at ITS. And thank you to Anvil DataWorks for hosting the webinar. We really appreciate it. And thanks again.
Bye-bye.